What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Dragonknight tank. So the DK tank is still one of the strongest tanking specs in the game right now, mainly because the DK provides two pretty significant buffs, both to magic and stamina DPS, in the form of engulfing flames, which increases flame damage taken by enemies by 10%, and also minor brutality through the use of Fragmented shield or Igneous shield, depending on which morph you're using. So DK tanks are still very much needed in vet trials, so definitely going to see these very often both in endgame guilds and progression groups. DKs are definitely still the top tanking class. So like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to recreate this build yourself. I will be talking about all the different sets and all different abilities in the game that you're going to want to pick up as a tank, because your job is really to help support the group. It's not necessarily to be a just meat shield or a damage sponge. You do need to play a little bit here in order to help buff your groups and debuff the enemy. So we'll be talking a lot about the different skills and the different set that you're going to want to run as a tank. We will not be doing a parse because obviously tanks do not have any sort of actual rotation or anything like that, but I will discuss a little bit behind my personal philosophy behind tanking and how I approach using the skills that I have in my toolkit. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So in terms of gear, this is just one of many different setups that you're going to be running. This is what I like to call my default setup. So when I'm not 100% certain what sort of content that I'm running, this is typically what I fall back to as a very basic, bare bones, will work for almost everything sort of setup here. And again, I will be talking about all the different sets and where you're going to want to use them. So for our must helm set, Lord Wardens is probably going to be one of the most useful sets in the game. It provides a lot of resistance to yourself, but it also provides resistances to people in the group as well. So whenever you take damage, you basically summon an orb that increases spell and physical resistance by 3870 to everybody within 8 meters. So it's pretty nice resistance buff. It does stack with things like Major Warden, Major Resolve, and other resistant buffs as well. So really nice for overall group survivability and your own personal survivability as well. This does come from ICP, Imperial City Prison, so you do need to have access to the Imperial City DLC in order to grab this set. For our first set here, we have Ebon Armory. This is a base game set. This comes from Crypt of Hearts. It's a heavy armor set, so you will need to farm it from Crypt of Hearts. You can do it on 1 or 2. Obviously, 1's going to be easier than 2, and you can also farm it on normal if you just want the armor pieces or the weapons. Now, last I checked, Ebon Armory weapons still do have the bug where if you bar swap and you have Ebon on both bars, you will momentarily lose that additional health for a split second and then regain it. So I would not recommend getting Ebon weapons, but you can certainly do so if that sort of little bug doesn't really bother you too much. For our second set, we have Alkosh. This is a DLC set, so this comes from the Trial Maw of Lord Kaj, so you do need to have access to the Thieves Guild DLC in order to grab this set. This is a medium armor set, so you will want to wear this in jewelry and weapons, so you can't really wear any armor pieces with Alkosh. Alkosh is still a very powerful debuff set right now in the game. I already went over why it is best suited on a tank in a previous video, but to kind of reiterate here, as a tank, you'll be getting a lot of synergies. You're in the best position to get synergies, and you're also in the best position to make sure Alkosh always hits the boss. And the Alkosh itself reduces physical and spell resistance by 30-10 but for enemy hit for 10 seconds. So this does stack with other debuffs, other penetration debuffs and buffs in the game. So very, very important to have in endgame trials groups. Now for our front bar weapon, we're going with a sword and shield, or just one-handed shield. It doesn't have to be a sword, it can be a dagger, it can be an axe, it can be a mace. We are going with decisive. Now in terms of enchants, there aren't that many good options right now, so you can go with defending if you want a little bit more resistances on your front bar. You can go with decisive like I have here for a little bit of additional ultimate generation. There are a few options here, but they're all fairly bad. This is basically the best of a lot of bad choices here. Now, in terms of poisons, we are going with a minor fracture poison. You can also go with a minor breach poison depending on the content that you're running and the overall composition of your DPS. So, for example, if you have a lot of stamina DPS, you might want to run minor fracture poisons. If you have a lot of magic DPS, you might want to run minor breach poisons instead. If you have a fair combo of each, then you can pick one or the other depending on which DPS you prefer to power. So, minor fracture poisons are going to be a little bit better just because stamina DPS do more DPS, and it's a little bit harder for them to get up to the pen cap. So, it's nice to be able to provide that minor fracture for your stamina DPS. Then for our backbar, we're still going with an Ice Staff infused with a Crusher enchant. You can go with the Lightning Staff instead if you want to help provide off-balance uptime. You can go with a Bow Bar instead if you want to get a little bit more DPS. And there's also a possibility of running Dual Wield, although that's very, very uncommon. There's only very few scenarios where you'd be running Dual Wield on the backbar here. Ice Staff gives you a nice amount of survivability through the Destruction Staff passives. So that's why I prefer Ice Staff, but again, you can go Lightning Staff for off-balance support, or you can go with Bow for more DPS support. Ice Staff just gives you a little bit more survivability when you're on your backbar here. Now for traits, jewelry traits, and enchants, I have all shield plate enchants. You can also run reduce feat cost, which basically reduces the cost of all your stamina abilities by a flat amount, which is also can be very useful because it also reduces the cost of things like dodge rolling and breaking free. But shield play is definitely going to be the best option here. You can also go with reduce potion cooldown glyphs. Those reduce your cooldown of your potions by 5 seconds each, so it basically allows you to drink more potions to get better sustain that way. It's very strong when you compare that with Argonians that get additional resources back whenever they drink a potion. For traits, I have 2 Triunes and 1 Harmony. I personally like to have at least 1 Harmony just for the additional heal when I get the Blood Altar synergy. It also gives me a little more resources when I get orbs or shards, so that's always nice to have. I like Triune as well because it basically gives me more resources across the board. Very, very useful. In terms of traits though, you have a lot of options when it comes to jewelry traits. So you can go with Robust if you want some more stamina. You can go with Arcane if you want more Magicka. Just make sure your stamina is higher than your Magicka here. You can even go with Healthy if you want some more survivability, you want some more health that way. You can go with Infused if you want to improve your enchant strength. So you have a lot of different options here. My personal favorite though is to pair 2 Triunes with 1 Harmony. For our armor traits and enchants, for our small pieces we have Sturdy with max health enchants, and then for our large pieces we have Infused with Prismatic enchants. Now, there's a lot of debate among the tanking community as to what traits and enchants you want to run. Some tanks swear by going with all Sturdy, other tanks like to do Infuse on your large pieces. Some tanks like to have Prismatic enchants on all of your pieces. Other tanks prefer to mix and match their small enchants depending on what resources they want the most at a given time. All of these options are open to you. It really depends on your own personal tanking style and how you feel about your sustain overall. So for me, the small sturdy pieces and a sturdy shield, for me, works out perfectly fine. I have no problem sustaining in most fights here. So I like to go with Infused on my large pieces with Prismatic enchants here. So that's pretty much it for all of the sort of armor traits and enchants and things like that. So now let's go ahead and talk about the various armor sets that you might want to have on hand. So again, as a tank, you're in a support position, so you will want to have pretty much all of these sets on hand, just in case your raid lead calls for a certain set to be worn. So the first set that I want to talk about here is going to be, let me find it, we already talked about Ebon. Ebon is definitely one of the strongest support sets in the game because it does provide some very nice max health. Basically allows DPS to spec a little bit less into health, a little bit more into doing damage. Moving on, Jailer's Tenacity is the first set here. We're going in alphabetical order here. This is a heavy armor set for Moonhunter Keep, so you do need to have access to the Wolf Hunter DLC if you want to grab this set. This is not a mandatory set, this is a very selfish set here, but it is useful in those scenarios where you want the additional selfishness here. So whenever you lose 7,000 more health from a single attack, you gain Major Vitality for 5 seconds, which increases your healing received by 30%. So again, that proc condition is 7,000 or more health, which might happen in some scenarios. Some boss fights you will get hit for 7,000 or more health in a single attack. And in those fights, that Major Vitality buff is going to be very nice. So right off the top of my head, Cloud Rest is a big one if you want to get that Major Vitality bonus. Asylum might also be a good instance to use Jailer's Tenacity if you are in the process of progressing and learning it, both on the off tank and the main tank, because you will potentially take 7,000 or more health from a single attack as an off tank, and you definitely will as a main tank here. So this is again a very selfish set, some niche scenarios, but it is very useful in that niche. The next sets here, we're going to skip over the Monsham sets for right now. Let's see here. You call Claw of Yolnahkriin. So this is a heavy armor set that you can get from the new trial Sunspire, and it provides the new buff Minor Courage. So Minor Courage does stack with Major Courage from Olorime or Spell Power gear. So this is a very nice set to hold on to. This is actually going to be one of the sets that you're going to want to have on hand, and it will probably find its way into pretty much every single tanking toolkit, regardless of whether you're a progression group or an endgame score running group. So it adds max health, minor aegis, max stamina. The perfected version adds max health on the 5-piece, but the 5-piece itself is whenever you taunt an enemy, you give you and 11 other group members minor courage for 15 seconds, which increases weapon and spell damage by 129. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds. So obviously only the tank can wear this because the proc condition requires you to taunt an enemy. Now, if you have 2 or more tanks, it's going to depend on what each tank is doing when it comes to which tank is going to wear Claw of Yolnahkriin. So for example, in VMAW, you're going to want it on the main tank because the off tank will not be in a position to really taunt Rakat too much unless you have some weird strategy where you're swapping Rakat taunt for whatever reason. So in that instance, Claw of Yolnahkriin will be best served on the main tank. And Sunspire is another good example. Again, you're going to want to have this on the main tank because the off tank might not necessarily be able to get a taunt off every 15 seconds. There might not be enough adds up to use Claw of Yolnahkriin on cooldown versus the main tank, which will always be on the dragon, so you'll always be able to get that minor courage uptime on when you have it on the main tank here. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding which tank is going to wear Claw of Yolnahkriin. Already talked about Alkosh. It's the strongest debuff set in the game. Definitely want to have this in group. And I believe there are a couple other sets that I don't have out right now. So let's see if I can find them here. So I believe we have a few overland sets that I missed. So to go over the overland sets, the first set I want to talk about is going to be Plague Doctor. This is a very selfish set, more for learning content, less so for actual score running. Just adds a bunch of max health. So again, very selfish, but really, really great for progression. The other set here is going to be Akaviri Dragonguard. This is a heavy armor set that comes from Eastmarch, so base game set here. Plague Doctor is from Deshaan, so base game set. So Akaviri Dragonguard reduces the cost of your ultimate by 15%. This basically cuts the cost of Warhorn down to 213 on a tank, DK tank. So you're able to get more Warhorn uptime, which basically results in greater major force uptime, which results in better DPS overall. So Akaviri Dragonguard is a pretty nice set to have. You won't really see this used too much in endgame score groups, but for progression groups it is fairly useful, especially when you consider it drops your Magma Shell ultimate from 200 down to 170, so you're able to get that Magma Shell up a little bit faster that way. And then the last set I want to talk about is going to be Livewire. Not really all used too often here, but it's mainly used to apply AoE concussion. Very, very nice for trials trash, but other than that, very, very niche set here, Livewire. Another set that you're going to want to hold on to from the Overland set that I did not happen to pick up here is going to be, if I can find it, Werewolf Hide. So Hide of the Werewolf is a meter armor set from Glenumbra, so very similarly to Alkosh, you're going to want this on jewelry and weapons. When you take damage, generate 5 ultimate. So basically very similar to Akaviri Dragonguard, just gets you more Warhorn uptime, better major force uptime, better DPS that way. Now for monster helm sets, you do have a few options when it comes to what monster helm set you're going to want to run. So again, starting in alphabetical order here. First one's going to be Bloodspawn. This is a base game set that comes from Spindle Clutch 2. Overall, it's not a particularly strong Monster Helm set, but it is the best one from the base game. It's actually probably the only Monster Helm set that's really useful in the base game. So without any DLCs, this is really your only option here. So when you take damage, you have a 6% chance to generate 14 ultimate and increase your spell and physical resistance by 6450 for 6 seconds. So again, kind of along the same lines as Hide of the Werewolf and Akaviri Dragonguard. More Warhorns, better major force uptime, more DPS. Earthgore is another monster helm set that you might want to have on hand. So this has been nerfed compared to in Wrathstone, so it only heals one person at a time. It heals the lowest health friendly target, so that might end up being you depending on what scenario you're using Earthgore, so it might not be that big of a deal. But if somebody else has lower health than you, in terms of percentage base, then they'll get that heal rather than you. So Earthgore is not quite as strong anymore, but in those, there are a few scenarios where you might want to run Earthgore because you're pretty much only going to be the only one that's going to be getting the proc here. Already talked about Lord Warden. Stonekeeper is another monster helm set that you might want to have on hand. It's come from Frost Vault, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to grab this set. When you block an attack, you gain an energy charge stack up to 1 stack per second. When you gain 6 charges, you release the energy, you restore 5350 stamina and magicka, and heal for 5350. And after you release the charge, you can't regain charges for 14 seconds. So basically this is a 20-second cooldown, which results in just over 250 additional regen per second when you have this on cooldown. The one piece is pretty unique in that it gives you stamina, magicka, and health. And this is again a selfish set. It really helps out with sustain overall. Not quite as strong as Earthgore when it comes to raw healing power, but it does return stamina and magicka instead as a trade-off. So pretty nice set to hold on to if you want a selfish monster helm set. Symphony of Blades. This is actually one of the key monster helm sets that pretty much all tanks are wearing nowadays. This comes from Depths of Malatar, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to grab this set. When you heal an enemy who has under 50% of their primary resource, in this case it's both magicka or stamina, you grant them Meridia's Favor, restoring 2325 magicka or stamina, whichever max is higher, every 1 second for 6 seconds. This effect can occur every 18 seconds. So this does require you to have a healing ability on your bar, and it does not proc on yourself, so it does need to proc on somebody else. So you do need to run something like Vigor or Cinderstorm in order to proc this set here. But it is a very nice set for sustain, really strong, especially when you have multiple people running Symphony of Blades. And then we have Thurvokun. This is a monster helm set from Fang Lair, so you do need to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC in order to grab this set. When you take damage from a nearby enemy, you summon a growing pool of desecrated bile for 8 seconds. Enemies in a bile take 567 disease damage every 1 second, and are afflicted with minor maim and minor defile for 4 seconds. So this basically is an AoE minor maim. Now, DKs already have an AoE minor maim through the use of Choking Talons, but obviously Choking Talons uses magicka, Thurvokun does not. It just procs whenever you take damage. It lasts for 8 seconds and it's not 8-second cooldown, so you can get 100% uptime on Thurvokun. Very nice set for progression guilds when you're running through trash. And finally, we have Vykosa. This comes from Moonhunter Keep, so you will need to have access to the Wolf Hunter DLC in order to grab this set. When you bash an enemy that you've taunted, you frighten them with a deafening howl, applying major maim to them for 3 seconds, lowering their damage down by 30%. So you do need to know a little bit behind the fight mechanics in order to make the most use out of Vykosa, but when you do know the mechanics, this can be very nice for damage mitigation. So for example, in Asylum, in Execute with Ohms, you can use Vykosa and basically reduce the damage that his fireballs will deal when he shoots them out, as long as you're able to time this correctly. You can also use this on the op tank in Asylum to reduce the damage that Lotus's Defiling Blast does when you bash him before he launches it out. It doesn't last for a very long time, it's only 3 seconds, but if you can time it correctly, you can greatly reduce the damage that a DPS is taking. So, pretty nice set to hold on to here. And that pretty much covers it for all of our sets. Moving on to our character sheet. So I am a Dark Elf just because I'm a Dark Elf tank on live, so I figured I might as well stick to my original race here. But Dark Elves are not going to be the best tanking race. The best tanking race in the game right now is up for debate. It's basically up between 3 different races. So you have Orcs, Nords, and Imperials. So Orcs get 2,000 max stamina, 1,000 max health. Very useful benefits there. You get 258 additional weapon damage. They also get a little bit of a heal as well through their passive whenever they deal, I believe, melee damage. So the reason why Orcs are going to be very strong is because of that additional weapon damage. If you are in a very high-end group, sometimes as a tank you're expected to do basically be an off DPS instead. So in that instance, the Orc is going to be the best fit there, because typically speaking you will have higher max stamina instead of max magicka. You're going to be in a stamina DPS spec, so Orcs will give you a little bit of additional stamina DPS that way. Nords get 2,000 max health and I believe 1,500 max stamina, and they get 3960 additional spell and physical resistance, plus they get some ultimate back whenever they take damage. So Nords get really nice resistances, so you can spec a little bit less into your resistances that way, because it's easier to reach the cap. You got some ultimate generation whenever you take damage, so again, better Warhorn uptime that way, plus your additional resource passives are obviously in line with what tanks are able to get here. Then you have the Imperials. 2,000 max health, 2,000 max stamina, and they get 333 additional resources whenever they deal, I believe it's direct damage. So you get some nice sustain through the Imperial passive, and again, max health, max stamina, always very useful to have on hand. So those are the three main races that are kind of competing for that top spot there, and then you have a fourth race, Argonians. Argonians, not quite as hot anymore as they used to be, so their main draw for Argonians is the fact that they get a potion passive, so whenever they drink a potion, they get, I believe, around 4,000 magicka, health, and stamina back, no matter what kind of potion they drink. So basically, Argonians get a little bit of additional sustain through that way. And they also get, I believe, some max magicka and some max health as well, and I believe they do get healing done modifiers as well. 4% or might be 4. No, it's more than 4%. I believe it's 8% healing done modifier. So that does affect your self heals. So you do have some support that way, but overall Argonians are not quite as strong as Imperials, Orcs, or Nords when it comes to races for tanking. Now for attributes, it's going to vary depending on which race you are. So obviously if you are, for example, an Imperial, you don't need to put as many points into health compared to if you're an Orc. Because Imperials have 2,000 max health, Orcs have 1,000 max health. In this scenario, I am a Dark Elf, so I have 1875 magicka and stamina, but I have no max health. So in this instance, I have 50 into health, 10 into stamina, and 4 into magicka. The general rule of thumb you want to kind of go with is for max health, try to sit at around 35k max health or so, with your basically your lowest health gear combination, which is typically speaking going to be something like Akaviri Dragonguard with Alkosh. And you always want to make sure your max stamina is higher than your max magicka, because you do want orbs and shards to return stamina rather than magicka. For our Mundustone, we're going with the Atronach for the additional magicka regen. A lot of our buffing moves do use magicka, so we just want to have higher magicka regen, so we're able to use them more often. We are going with Tri-Stat food. This is purple rarity food in the base game, so it gives you max magicka, max health, and max stamina. Then you have Vampirism, so this gives you the 10% additional magicka regen and stamina regen, and when you're stage 3, it also reduces the damage you take when you're below 50% health. So pretty strong passives overall, and as a tank you don't really need to worry about the additional flame damage because you're a tank. You're able to eat that damage pretty easily. Now going over our skills, this is only one particular setup, and I will be discussing all the various flex spots once we finish our bar setups. So, Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Fragmented Shield, Green Dragon Blood, Engulfing Flames, and Replenishing Barrier on the front bar. So you do have a few flex spots here. And on the back bar, we have Inner Rage, Balance, Choking Talons, Blockade of Frost, Unrelenting Grip, and Aggressive Warhorn. Again, a few flex spots here. So on the front bar here, you have one flex spot. I would consider Engulfing Flames a flex spot, so if you not have any magic DPS, for example, Engulfing Flames is obviously of no use, so it's a flex spot that way. And this ultimate, for this front bar ultimate, is also a flex spot. On the back bar here, Choking Talons and Unrelenting Grip are flex spots. Blockade of Frost is also arguably a flex spot, depending on your specific content, what level of rating you're at. So those, you have 3 flex spots on the back and 1 flex spot on the front. For a total of 4 flex spots, arguably 2 are definitely flex spots, the other 2 are kind of quasi-flex spots, depending on your specific group. Warhorn, on the other hand, is not a flex spot. You must have this here either on the back bar or the front bar. Now, when it comes to other abilities you can have on hand, starting off here with the Draconic Power line, you can go with Protective Plate, which reduces the damage you take from projectiles by 50%. So if you're in a fight with projectiles, having Protective Plate might be very useful to reduce the amount of incoming damage. Deep Breath is another useful, very niche ability for an AoE interrupt. Again, very, very niche, but very useful in those niches where you want to interrupt multiple things at the same time. And the Earth and Heart line, Cinder Storm is a really nice both self-heal and heal for your allies. So you can see here it heals about 1050 every 1 second before we adjust for CPs. So really nice, and this is also one way that you can proc Symphony of Blades if you are using that set. Magma Shell is one ultimate that you might want to consider having on the front bar here. This is basically your I'm going to be invincible for 12 seconds button. So basically reduces all incoming damage to 3% of your max health. Basically, essentially making you invincible as long as you have good self-heals going on. So really, really solid, especially for progression groups. Now, for under the one-handed shield line, Absorb Magic is a nice kind of, I don't know what to put in this slot here, so I'm just going to put Absorb Magic on the front bar. So you just basically get a little bit of additional passive boost to your block cost reduction and the amount of damage you can block. It's not really all that much, but it's better than nothing. Plus, it also heals you whenever you get hit by a spell projectile here. So that is Absorb Magicka. It can only really be used on the sword and board bar for obvious reasons. Now, for Destruction Staff, you might want to consider picking up something like Elemental Drain in case you're running 4-man content and you don't have a healer and you have Magicka DPS. You might want to run Elemental Drain, really nice to have. Then you also want to consider picking up Crushing Shock for a ranged interrupt. So really nice to have that that flexibility there when it comes to interrupting things there. And then moving on from there, onto the Vampire skill line, it might be nice to have both Invigorating Drain and Elusive Mist here. So Elusive Mist is particularly useful for progression guilds, progression groups. Just keep in mind that while you're in the form, you can't be healed and you don't have any Magicka regen. So be a little bit mindful of when you're using this. This is not a get out of jail free card, but it is a really strong move nonetheless. Invigorating Drain is basically to win those instances where your job is basically to be a Warhorn generator. So this gives you a lot of ultimate whenever you use the ability here. In the Fighter skilled line, Circle of Protection, either morph. Ring of Preservation is my preferred morph. This just gives you minor protection. Useful in instances where you might need to stack and you want some additional mitigation. So I like to pick up this ability here. And then from there, under the Psijic skill line, you can also run Deep Thoughts instead of Balance. So Balance gives you trades off health for Magicka. So basically gives you pretty much essentially infinite Magicka sustain, and you can change that Magicka to Stamina by using Fragmented Shield here. But if you don't want to run that, then you can do something like Deep Thoughts here in order to get resources back. And then for your major resistance buffs, you can run either morph of Spiked Armor instead. Temporal Guard is one potential ultimate you can run on the front bar here for the minor protection while it's slotted. It's up to you if you want to use that or not. Under the Undaunted line, pretty much all their active abilities are flex spots for various reasons. So Overflowing Altar for the synergy as well as the minor lifesteal. Shadow Soak for your stamina and Magicka DPS for the Black Widow synergy. Bone Surge for both the shield and the major vitality bonus that you get when you activate the synergy. And the Energy Orbs, 1 for the heal and 2 for the additional combustion synergy. So pretty much everything here can be put on a flex spot, obviously. Then under your Assault line, you have Resolving Vigor as a self-heal as well as an AoE heal. So this is another way you can help proc Symphony of Blades. Over here with the Undaunted line, just to let you guys know, Minor Lifesteal will also proc Symphony of Blades as well. Then if you are in a score running guild, you will also want to pick up Charging Maneuver here for the speed boost to get faster times. So faster times means higher scores. On the support line, Efficient Purge is a skill you definitely want to have on hand for those fights where you will need to remove debuffs off of yourself. You also want to make sure to pick up the Magicka 8 passive, which increases your Magicka regen by 5% with 1 point into it, 10% for 2 points in it for each support ability you have slotted. For example, on the front bar I have Barrier as slotted, so I get 10% additional Magicka regen there. And that is pretty much all of your skills that you're going to want to have on hand. Now going over our champion points, I do need to redistribute them. So for our green CPs, the CP cap is 810, so we get 270 CPs to put across our different constellation colors. For Arcanist, we have a total of 64 points, 49 points into Tenacity. We're going to have 61 or 66 points into Shadow Ward. Then I like to have 40 into Tumbling, 40 into Warlord, and then I put the rest into Sprinter. So you can play around with those sort of distributions however you'd like. Again, you can put Shadow Ward up to 66 or 72. Those are the next 2 jump points, and then take some points out of Tumbling or Warlord, depending on whether you anticipate having to use Break Free or Dodge Roll more often. Trial. For our blue CPs, because a lot of these CPs are based around DPS, you might not need to run a lot of different CPs, and it also depends on whether you're off DPSing as a tank. Generally speaking though, as a tank, you will want to 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn, and then you can put the other 70 points into Precise Strikes. This is just because, again, a lot of these nodes are focused more on DPS, less on actual support. So you want Blessed for the additional healing done, you want Elfborn for critical heals with your Green Dragon Blood, then you want Precise Strikes for critical heals with Vigor if you're running Vigor there. And finally for our red CPs, this is a very generic approach, so I have 81 Ironclad, 61 thick skin, and 64 in a hardy and elemental defender. Now, depending on the trial that you're running, you might want to shift some points around depending on what kind of boss you're up against and what kind of damage you're taking in that trial. So for example, Vima, you're going to be taking a little bit more magic damage if you are not the main tank in Rakat, so you might want to shift a few points out of hardy, not that many, probably only drop down to like 49 or 43, and shift them into elemental defender, spell shield, heavy armor focus. So just play around with your red CPs. It really depends on the specific trial that you're running in order to maximize your overall mitigation. And that's pretty much it for all the build information on tanking. So now let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy of tanking. A little bit difficult for me to explain this without actually showing you guys what to tank, so definitely check out the streams archive playlist that I have where I do a lot of tanking for Mayflower and Hellfire Dominion, so you guys can get an idea of how I tank on a DK tank, both in more of a progression style setting here. So main thing you kind of want to keep in mind is obviously as a tank you have really, I'd say, 3 jobs. First job is to not die. A dead tank is not a very good tank. Your second job, which is pretty much on par with the first job, is to keep taunt on the boss. If you're not able to taunt the boss, you're doing a pretty bad job as a tank. And the third job is to basically act as support for the group. That's either buffing your allies through various buffs, like Call of Yolnahkriin, or debuffing the enemy using skills and armor sets like Alkosh and Engulfing Flames. So really the crux behind learning how to tank is first learn how to stay alive while maintaining aggro on the boss. This involves learning the mechanics, learning what you can dodge, what you can block, things like that. And then once you get good at your own survivability, then you can focus in on being less selfish and playing a little bit more support roles. So for example, in progression you might be running Absorb Magic on the front bar here, you might be running Vigor instead of Engulfing Flames in order for the additional heal. But once you get used to the specific fight, you can trade that out for Engulfing Flames if you have magic DPS in the group, obviously, or Shadow Silk if you have stamina DPS in the group, and then focus in on helping your allies out to deal more DPS that way. So that's kind of the philosophy behind tanking in Elder Scrolls Online. Very different from other MMOs where tanks are generally seen more as a damage sponge / kind of an off healer. Now, in terms of what you want to try to maintain, if you're running Blockade on the back bar, you want to try to maintain that in order to get that Crusher uptime going. But beyond that, it's very, very reactionary. The other skill you want to maintain at all times is going to be Heroic Slash for the minor maim as well as the minor heroism. But beyond that, aside from obviously making sure you have taunt on the boss, everything else is basically keeping a track of your uptimes, keeping a track on your debuff timers and things like that, and making sure you're able to stay alive. For Green Dragonblood, don't try to use it too often. It does require a lot of magicka to use, and you're going to want to save it for when your health is probably below 50%. That does take a little bit of getting used to, knowing when you can use Green Dragonbloods, what sort of attacks I can hit, I can take without dying, so that way I can time my Green Dragonbloods that way. But that's kind of the idea behind running Green Dragonblood. Now with balance, because it does end up using health, you want to be a little bit careful when you use balance as well. Make sure you're not using it while the boss is about to do a heavy attack or some sort of mechanic that might deal a lot of damage. You should be getting heals from your healer, but if your healer is not used to you running balance just yet, you can potentially give them a call out, say, hey, I'm using balance now, make sure to heal me up, because balance does have that 50% healing done reduction for 4 seconds after you use it. But beyond that, again, a lot of this stuff is reactionary, and you really have to play based on the specific group that you're running and the specific content that you're running. So I highly recommend checking out my past streams on my channel to kind of take a look at how I approach tanking at various levels of content. That is it for this build video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to comment in the section below, and I will get back to them as soon as I can. Again, hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.